Hey everybody, welcome back to another EDH video. Today's video we are on day 11 of 25 days of deck building, and today we are on Is It, my favorite color pairing of all time. I don't care what anybody says is the best color pairing. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyways, we're gonna build a deck around Breeches the Blastmaster. One generic and an Is It, legendary creature, Goblin Pirate with Menace. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, flip a coin. When you win the flip, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. When you lose a flip, Breeches the Blastmaster deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. It's a 3/3. So I'm building this kind of like artifact storm. I want to copy my artifact spells and just keep, sacrificing them every turn. Even maybe give them flash if there's a way to give them flash, and just keep casting them on everybody's turns. It is each turn, so it does happen on each person's turn. If you have, you cast 2 1-drops on your turn and then sacrifice something, and then on next turn, somebody else's turn, you keep doing it over and over again. You know what I mean? You can do this 4 times a turn if you have something to give your artifact splash. But yeah, let's get right into what's actually inside the deck. So we have a very artifact-heavy deck here. We have 2 Planeswalkers, 21 creatures, 4 sorceries, 4 instants, 33 artifacts, and 35 lands. I kind of made as many artifacts as I possibly could into this deck. So a lot of the creatures are also artifacts. This deck's coming in at a modest $201. I don't know why I didn't just round it down to 200, but it's $201 apparently. So first up we have Ramp. We have a lot of good options in colorless. So here we go. We got Arcane Signet, 2 generic, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Just again, standard Ramp that we have here. Next we have Cloud Key, 3 generic, enters, choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Spells of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. Not really Ramp, but it's reduction. Commander Sphere, 3 generic, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. You can sacrifice it to draw a card. A little bit of extra value there. Cursed Mirror, 2 generic and red, taps for red. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may have it come a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except against haste. Fellwar Stone, 2 generic, add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. There's probably going to be a red or a blue deck out there. Enthusiastic Mechanaut, it's an Is It, artifact creature, goblin, artificer, flying, artifact spells you cost 1 less to cast. Ethereum Sculptor, 1 generic and a blue, artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Just a bunch of these, like making stuff cost 1 less. Foundry Inspector, 3 generic, artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Again, we're going to have a bunch of these. Next up we have Iron Mirror, 2 generic, adds 1 red. It's also an artifact. It's a 1/1. That's just one of our mana dorks. I don't know why. What else I have to say? Drawer is familiar. 4 generic, artifact, creature, bird, flying. Historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so this includes our commander, but also artifacts. Nickel Metal Torque, 2 generic, add a colorless. Target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn, so you can sacrifice a non-artifact for your commander, pretty much. Mind Stone, 2 generic, tap it, add a colorless. Tap with generic, tap it, sacrifice it, draw a card. Ornithopter Paradise, 2 generic, tap it, add 1 mana of any color. It's an artifact, so it's sacrificable. It's the only thing it's in here for, really. And to ramp a little bit. Silver Mirror, 2 generic, taps for a blue, artifact. It matters. We can sacrifice it if we want to. Next up we have Soul Ring, 1 generic, 2 colorless. It's an artifact. It's really good, I guess, in this game. Some people say it should be banned. Talisman of Creativity, 2 generic, tap it, tap it for a colorless, tap it for a blue or a red, and you deal 1 damage to yourself. Thought Vessel, 2 generic, you have no maximum hand size, tap it for a colorless. Not much to say about that. Grand Dynamo, 4 generic, tap it for 3 colorless. It's an artifact, you can sacrifice it. You can also copy it if you want to. Get 2 Grand Dynamos. Ineffable, 6 generic. Color spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and all the other stuff doesn't really matter. It's a little bit of removal, a little bit of little card advantage. But Semblance Anvil, 3 generic, enters, you exile a non-land card from your hand, and then spells you cast with that share a card type with it costs 2 less to cast. Nice that we have draw. We're in red-blue, so we have some good options. Aether Spellbomb, 1 generic. You can sacrifice it with a blue and return target creature to its owner's hand, or sacrifice it with a colorless and draw a card. Chromatic Star, 1 generic. You can filter mana into it and sacrifice it, or whenever it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. Command Sphere. You can sacrifice it, draw a card. We already went over this card. We already talked about it. We don't need to get more into it. Next we have Coveted Jewel, 6 generic. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. Whenever you tap it for mana, you can add 3. Whenever 1 or more creatures an opponent attacks you, they basically gain control of it. Duretti, the first ability, discard up to 2 cards, and you may draw that many, and you can sacrifice an artifact and trash for treasures, and then the emblem you'll never get, so it doesn't matter. Demand answers, 1 generic and a red. Adds an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact, or discard a card and draw 2. Golden Egg, 2 generic. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card. You can filter some mana. You can also sacrifice it like a food. Drorian, Ruin Diver, 1 generic. And it is it. Whenever you cast your second spell, each turn, draw a card. This could also be your secondary commander if you want it to. Malcolm, the Eyes. Is it. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, investigate. It can also be your secondary commander if you want. Mishra's Bauble, 0. Sacrifice it, look at the top card of target player's library, draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Prophetic Prism, 2 generic. Whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and you can also pay 1 and filter some mana into it if you want to. You can filter blue to red. Pirate Spellbomb, 1 generic. Sacrifice it for a red, it deals 2 damage to any target. Sacrifice it for a colorless and draw a card. Sensei's Divining Top, 1 generic, and then you can pay 1 generic, look at the top 3, put them back in any order, or you can tap it and draw a card and put Sensei's Divining Top on top. Soul Guide Lancer enters, exile target card from a graveyard, or you can sacrifice it, exile each opponent's graveyard, or you can sacrifice it with a colorless and tap it and draw a card. Lumbus, 2 generic. Whenever it enters the battlefield, scry 1. You can also sacrifice it like a food. Whenever it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, its owner shuffles it into their library. Ichor Wellspring, 2 generic. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Whenever it leaves or is put into the graveyard, draw a card. Removal, red. Vandal Blast, destroy target artifact you don't control, and you can also overload it for 5 and destroy all artifacts you don't control. Rapid Hybridization, destroy target creature for 1 blue. They create a 3/3 frog lizard creature. Thongify, destroy target creature for a blue. They create a 3/3 green ape. It can't be regenerated. That's important, I guess. Blastmaster, 8 in red. Costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, and then deals 13 damage to each creature, including yours, but you don't have that many, so it doesn't matter. Okay, we have Artifacts Matter. Crystal Skull, Isu Spyglass, 2 generic, 2 blue. Look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of them, and it taps for a blue. Arcwave Innovation enters the battlefield tap unless you control an island. You can pay a blue, tap it, and the next spell you cast this turn has Improvise. Emperor Lurker of the Lock, 2 generic and blue. 1 less for each artifact you control, enters and you mill 4 cards, and then you can tap it and choose target artifact card in your graveyard and return it. You can play this turn. Goblin Engineer, 1 generic and a red, enters the battlefield's library for an artifact card, put it in the graveyard, and you can pay a blue or a red and tap it and sacrifice it and return something with 3 or less to the battlefield. Genius Artillery, whenever an artifact enters, it deals damage to people. Inventor's Fair, you can, whenever you have 3 or more artifacts at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain a life. Taps for a colorless, and you can tap 4, tap it, and search for an artifact. Junk Diver, 3 generic. Whenever it dies, return another target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Mirrorworks, 5 generic. Whenever another non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. We're going to have a lot of tokens, so I figured this went in with it. Mirror Battlesphere, 7 generic. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it creates 4 1/1 colorless mirrors. Whenever it attacks, you can tap X, untap mirrors, and it gets that plus X plus 0. Mirror Retriever, 2 generic. Whenever it dies, return target artifact card from the graveyard to your hand. Mystic Forge, 4 generic. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast artifact and colorless spells from the top of them, and then you can pay 1 and exile the top card of your library. Ornithopter, it's a 0 mana flying 0/2 artifact creature. We have Padim, Console of Innovation, 3 generic and blue. Artifacts you control have hexproof. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest mana value or tied for the highest mana, draw a card. Phyrexian Metamorph, 3 generic and a Phyrexian mana. Enters battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Portal to the Phyrexian, 9 generic. Enters battlefield. Each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. Beginning of your upkeep, you can just return a creature card from a graveyard to the battlefield. Phyrexian's Core, taps for a generic and tap 1, tap it, sacrifice an artifact, you gain 1 life. Scrap Mastery, 3 generic, 2 red. You basically sacrifice all the artifacts on your... Each player does this. You sacrifice all the artifacts and then return them all to your battlefield. Everybody else does that for their own battlefield. Scrap Trawler, 3 generic. And whenever an artifact is put in a graveyard, return something with lesser mana value. Sculpting Steel, 3 generic. Enters the battlefield as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield. Sharamir, 3 generic. You may cast artifact spells as though they had flash. It has flash itself. Again, so we can just kind of do that every turn, our commander's ability. Trash for Treasure, 2 generic and red. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact, and then return entire artifact from a graveyard to the battlefield. Woodwalker Helm, 2 generic and a blue. If you create 1 or more artifact tokens, instead create those many plus a map. Unwinding Clock, 4 generic. Untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untap step, just to get the mana to cast artifacts. Whir of Invention, X, 3 blue. Search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Also has Improvise, which you can tap artifacts to pay for the X. We have some random. Twinning Staff, 3 generic. If you would copy a spell 1 or more times, instead copy that many times, plus an additional time, you may choose new targets for the copy. Tavern Scoundrel, 1 generic and a red. Whenever you win a flip, create 2 treasures. Our commander flips coins, why not? Crux Thumb, 2 generic. If you win a flip, instead flip 2 coins and ignore 1. It's an artifact you can sacrifice if you wanted to, so I figured I'd throw it in here. It's also Crux Thumb, so deals with flipping coins. Next up we have lands. 11 islands. Yep. I really do try to stick to the even amount of lands in here. So 11 islands, 11 mountains. Pretty standard for my decks. I tend to stick with that through most of my decks. Some of my personal decks I don't, but for this I think I will. Training Center, it is about to tap unless you have 2 or more opponents. Taps for a blue or a red. And then we have Sulphur Falls, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a mountain. Taps for a blue or a red. It's pretty standard lands, honestly. Storm Carved Coast, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Taps for a blue or a red. I just want all these in here for mana fixing, pretty much. Shivan Reef, taps for a colorless, taps for a blue or red. Deals 1 damage to you if you tap it before they're colored. River Glide Pathway, you can either play it on the blue side or the red side, and on either whichever side you play it on, it taps for the respective color. Phyrexian Core, we already went over this, but I figured I'd put it in here because it is a land. You tap it for a colorless. And then we have Inventor's Fair, which is the one that lets you sacrifice it and search for an artifact card and reveal it and put it into your hand. You can only activate that ability if you have 3 or more artifacts, though. Crossbow Snarl, enters the battlefield. You may reveal an island or mountain card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and then it taps for a blue or a red. Or Furious Lake. It's a filter land, so you pay colorless and you tap it and add a Exotic Orchard. Add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Again, pretty standard cards. You've seen these all before. Command Tower, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Again, we've seen this before. Cascade Bluffs, taps for colors. Tap a red or a blue, tap it. You get a blue, blue-red, or a red. Archway of Innovation, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. Tap it for a blue, and then the next spell you cast, you can tap, and the next spell you cast has Improvise, which means you can tap artifacts to pay for the cost. Yeah, that's the Breeches deck. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to follow me on Blue Sky, join the Discord, all that good stuff. I just knocked my mic halfway across the room somehow. Anyways, peace out.